What We Pretend We Can't See by Gyzym. Chapter 5. It's Sunday dinner at the Bury that night, and after a few minutes' consideration, Harry decides to go. He doesn't, some weeks. He's got a standing invite, they all do, but it's a casual thing, very much a come if you can and don't worry if not sort of commitment, and, well, it was different when Harry was with Ginny. Back then he felt like, oh, he doesn't know, like he'd finally earned his place at the Weasleys' table maybe, however freely they'd offered it to him years before. He knows that's a little fucked up. He knows they all, Molly especially, Ginny especially, would be horrified to hear that the reason he doesn't come to dinner every week is that he's not sure anymore that it's his place to be there. But he isn't sure. And there's always this voice in the back of his head when he goes too often, like when he eats too many meals in a row at Ron and Hermione's. It says, "Nobody wants you here, Harry." It says, "Run along back to your cupboard." Tonight, though, it's been 3 weeks since his last one, so he figures he's probably safe. He makes a side dish with broccoli and cheese and breadcrumbs. Molly never lets him cook anything once he actually arrives, and apparates onto their front stoop moments after he pulls it out of the oven. "Harry, dear!" Molly cries when she opens the door, beaming at him. She wraps him up in a hug the minute Arthur takes the steaming dish out of his hands, then pulls back, still holding on to Harry's upper arms to give him a critical once-over. "You're too thin!" "You always say that," Harry says, laughing and extricating himself from her, unwinding his scarf. "That's because it's always true," Molly chides, she says, handing it to him. "And oh, George, not the armchair!" She's gone in the blink of an eye over to where George is snickering down at a chair, while once a lovely shade of burgundy seems to have come over all yellow and striped, and sprouted a pair of apparently flightless wings. Harry shakes his head, takes a bite of his scone, and goes to find Ron and Hermione. It's a nice night. He's glad he came. Bill and Fleur have made an appearance, not unheard of, but rare, and little Victoire is a spitfire at 5, happily running around in the back garden and poking curiously at her cousin Rose. George is here too, and Angelina, and Percy's wife Penelope, but not Percy himself, who is apparently chained to his desk until quarterly reports come out in April. Neville's not showing up this week, but Ginny has, and Harry smiles at her from across the room. She smiles back. The meal is wonderful, as always, the conversation raucous and hard to follow, and over dessert Harry remembers Malfoy's crazy rant about wizarding houses. And it's not like Harry really believed any of it or anything, but, well, Malfoy did say to ask anyone, even Weasley. He figures asking the whole lot of them won't hurt. "Hey, Arthur," Harry says casually as they're milling around, refilling their drinks and clearing plates. "You ever think about changing the floor plan of the house now that it's just you and Molly?" Arthur smiles, releases a considered hum. "Oh, sure we have. Maybe we even will one of these days, but—" He throws Molly a loaded look, exacerbation and fondness all wrapped up together. "To be honest with you, Harry, we like the old place the way it is. And it does always seem such a lot of work doing the math and things to get the proportions right." "I don't think that would be that hard," Harry says. He looks out into the living room thoughtfully. "Just knock out that wall, maybe, and push into the room behind it, and then—" He trails off because every Weasley in the entire house is staring daggers at him. "Harry!" Molly says faintly. "What a perfectly awful thing to say!" It's not his fault," Arthur says hastily. "The lad was raised by muggles. They do that sort of thing all the time. Remolding, they call it." "Remodeling," Hermione corrects in the long-suffering tones of a woman who has had probably 1,000 conversations about electricity with her father-in-law. Sure, says Arthur. "Remodeling, yes. Anyway, apparently it's perfectly normal, very common. I've heard that some muggles will even buy a house just to knock it down and build another on the very same spot." "What?" says Ron. "But that's barbaric," says Ginny. "Even I wouldn't go that far," says George. "Charm the walls to ooze slime, sure, that's hilarious, but knock them down. Knock a whole place down. Don't know how you could do it and not feel like a murderer." "I guess if the house didn't have any magic," Bill starts and stops shuddering. "Ugh, no, I still don't think I could stomach it." "This is a very disturbing discussion to have in front of my child, Harry," Fleur tells him. "I hope we will not hear such horrible things from you in the future." Harry stares at them all, boggled. Angelina and Penelope, who were both raised at least partially muggle, look like they have some sympathy for him, but Hermione, who of all people should understand, is giving him a look just as stern as the rest of them. You could have avoided that entire unpleasant experience if you'd just read Hogwarts A History. That's all I'm saying, she tells him primly a few minutes later when she, Harry and Ron have settled into their chairs by the fire. Harry, who is still catching horrified glances from the now slightly more subdued Weasley clan, has taken the one George altered as an act of unspoken penance. Every few minutes the cushion seems to swell a bit under his bottom. He thinks he has maybe 6 minutes left before it lets out a truly enormous fart. There's a whole chapter about the nature of magical structures, do you know? That any magic that's been around long enough develops personality, Harry says. He takes a long sip of his wine. Yeah, you know, I think I've heard that somewhere before. Well, yes, of course, but it's not just that, Hermione says. It's with magical dwellings. It all gets a bit complicated. Generations of wizards and witches live in them, feeding off their magic. Eventually, it becomes kind of an amalgam. Not just of the house's magic and personality, but of everyone who lived there before. Look, it's like this, Ron says, correctly interpreting Harry's look of blank confusion. In my old bedroom on the 2nd floor, there's that window that sticks, right? Sure, says Harry cautiously, not sure where this is going. Well, Ron says, that's because when I was a kid, I couldn't sleep without the windows shut. Because somebody, he raises his voice pointedly, told me that I'd suck all the air out of the room in my sleep and suffocate. Sorry, says Bill in passing, handing Rose over to Ron and not sounding apologetic at all. You snored really loud. You needed to pay. Your uncle was a terrible brother, Ron tells Rose in a sing-song voice. The most terrible brother of all. Hey, calls George, sounding wounded. That's an insult to me. That's an insult to Fred's memory. Take it back or apologize to the great Fred in the sky. Ron groans. Apologizing to the great Fred in the sky is a more involved and humiliating process every time George makes someone do it. But nobody argues, both because it seems like pretty fitting tribute and because they all like to imagine that somewhere Fred's really enjoying it. Fine. You're all terrible brothers. Does that make you happy? Icaronicans, you do love me. George sighs and goes out in the back garden with Victoire and Bill to build a snowman. Anyway, Ron says, shifting Rose in his lap. I had to keep the window cracked, so for ages I just sort of used stuff to prop it up. Sticks and rocks and things, whatever I could find. But after a while the house got the idea, and after that the window was always cracked. Even when it was freezing or pouring rain, it would stay open. But the old girl wouldn't let any cold air or water, nasty bugs or anything in, just the noise from outside. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Hermione says. She throws Ron an approving smile, and Ron winks at her before he busies himself with entertaining their daughter. Because the thing is, Harry, in 100 years the window will still be open all the time, just letting sound in, and whoever lives here then won't know about Ron or the trick his brothers played on him or anything else. They just know the house has a weird quirk where it doesn't like to shut that window, and that'll become what's true. And for every magical structure, there's hundreds or even thousands of little things like that. They're all greater than the sum of their parts, and that's especially true the older they get, and the more people who've lived in them. But that doesn't make any sense, Harry says, keeping his voice low to avoid triggering another round of Weasley wrath. I mean, if that were true then, for God's sake, Hogwarts would have a personality so well developed it could choose sides and fight in a war, Hermione said pointedly, and Harry's mouth snaps shut. He thinks about Grimmauld Place, sitting cold and shuttered after housing centuries upon centuries of blacks, just creature and that mad old painting of Walburga rattling around inside. He thinks about Sirius, the last of his line, finally coming home, and of the way he'd hated the place, treated it like a prison, let Buckbeak piss and shit in it, wished he were anywhere else. He thinks about how even that must have been better for the old pal than Harry, not an ounce of the family blood in him, moping around and feeling sick, defeated, empty, feeling like he'd gladly trade every last brick and floorboard for just a minute more with any of the people he'd lost who had, at one point or another, walked those dusty halls. Harry thought, when he saw Grimmauld Place, that it was a trap, a sinkhole designed by fate's cruel hand to deepen and exacerbate his grief. It only cures him now to wonder if maybe the house was grieving too, if perhaps it had been grieving longer than Harry had been alive. "God damn it," Harry says, "I think Malfoy was right." Hermione and Ron exchange an apprehensive glance. Harry's getting really sick of that. "And when," says Hermione after a moment, "did you and Malfoy get around to talking about the nature of magical houses?" Harry says. Heat prickles on the back of his neck. "Well, we kind of, I had breakfast this morning. Ron chokes on his breath. Hermione comes within an inch of dropping her glass. It takes Harry a second, but then he puts together the concept of breakfast with just how drunk he was at the pub last night. Not to mention with the fact that if anyone saw him leave, it was with Blaise Zabini. "Oh my God," Harry says, loud enough that several nearby Weasleys turn to look. Deeply and desperately unwilling to have this conversation with them, he loudly said, "I can't believe I forgot to pick up eggs today," and then remains stock still, waiting until they've all turned back to what they were doing before. Harry collapses back into his chair and glares at Ron and Hermione. "Oh my God," he hisses, barely audible this time. It wasn't not that kind of breakfast. I can't believe you'd even think it's ridiculous. I mean, as if I would never with Malfoy. You guys, seriously, are you both crazy? You both must be crazy, because that's the most absurd thing I've ever heard." "Do you know," says Hermione after a long pause, "I think I'm going to have another drink." "Mind filling mine up too?" Ron says. "Really appreciate it. Just as full as you like." Hermione stands and takes their glasses, and then, with a little shake of her head, Baby Rose. "Sorry," she says. I want her to grow up to be self-actualized," and walks off without giving any further explanation than that. "What?" Harry starts. "Having the foggiest," Ron says quickly and drains his glass. "So, obviously we are crazy for drawing the conclusions that we did." "Crazy?" Harry repeats, because he feels it needs saying again. "Real clear about where the crazy's living in this conversation, mate. Thanks," Ron says. "But can I ask you why you did, end up having breakfast with Malfoy this morning?" "Stop saying it with those significant little pauses," Harry hisses, horrified. "That makes it sound like I'm telling you it was just breakfast, real breakfast, eggs and bacon and things." "Of course it was," Ron says, clapping him briefly on the shoulder. "Why now?" "Oh, well, he came by in a bit of a strop about a thing and a prophet," Harry admits. Ron blinks at him. "You saw today's prophet." "Well, I wouldn't have," Harry says patiently, "except that Malfoy came by in a strop about it at 6:30 in the morning, yelled and kicked at my door until I let him in, too. I'm sure the neighbors are terrified to live next to me now." "Oh, right," Ron says, "because all those time you've come home covered in blood before have made them feel very safe." He pauses and says, "Wait, how does Malfoy even know where you live?" "Apparently Blaise Zabini's an unspeakable." "No kidding?" says Ron, leaning back in his chair. "Huh, I can see that, I suppose. Hermione, did you know Blaise Zabini was an unspeakable?" "You know, the point of their being called unspeakables is that we're not supposed to speak about it," Hermione says, returning from the kitchen plus 2 drinks and minus 1 baby. "How did we happen across this piece of information?" "Harry was just explaining to me how Malfoy got his address from Blaise Zabini," Ron tells her as she sits down. "So he could come kick at his door and yell at him about this morning's prophet." Hermione gives Ron a pained look and passes him his drink, which he takes a gulp from in obvious gratitude. To Harry she says, "You saw this morning's prophet?" "I see the prophet sometimes. I'm not a hermit," Harry snaps, needled by hearing the same question twice in less than 2 minutes. "Oh, I know that," Hermione says. "Just usually I'm trying to think of a way to phrase this delicately." "Usually when you see yourself in the papers you throw a right fit about it," Ron says cheerfully. "Ron!" says Hermione. "Well, he does," says Ron, unrepentant. "Remember last May, the thing with the Ministry League?" "Oh, well, yes," Hermione says. She gives Harry a long-suffering look. "Even you have to admit you didn't exactly comport yourself well." "They said I was selling state secrets to fund Felix addiction," Harry says, scandalized. "They said I was committing treason, Hermione." "Yes, but," Hermione says, "you weren't, and neither was that tree you punched, Harry." "Trees," says Ron. "There were 2. One of them was a bit frail and sickly, as I recall, and cracked sort of pathetically, and you said, 'Too easy,' and then stomped around until you found that nice oak that broke your hand. And then at St. Mungo's, one of the healers said, 'What happened here, Mr. Potter?' Totally innocent medical question. Do you remember what you did?" "I knocked over the exam card," Harry said sheepishly, because, yeah, he did that. He thinks someday he might get over the shame. "You knocked over the exam card," Ron agrees. "So can you see why we might be a little... Hermione, what's the word I'm looking for here?" "Incredulous," Hermione suggests. "Bewildered, astounded." Astounded little play, Ron says, grinning at her. So yes, Harry, you can see why we were a little astounded to learn that you saw yourself on the front page of the Prophet today. I'm not saying they're all true treason and exam card blowouts. I understand that was a special circumstance, but you didn't sulk through dinner or anything. Harry would like to protest that he wouldn't have sulked through dinner, but he knows the evidence is against him on that one. Yeah, well, I guess I kind of had it all out with Malfoy. I don't know. He thinks about it. I suppose I wasn't that bothered, to be honest. I mean, I did at least say what they're saying I said this time. You did? Hermione says. Yeah, I did. Didn't know she was a reporter, or I'd never given her the time of the day, but... Harry shrugs. I said it, so I suppose it's fair play. Malfoy's a lot angrier about the whole thing than I am. Hermione stares at him for a long, hard second, her gaze fierce and a little uncomfortable. Harry makes a face at her. Yep, I can't do this, Hermione says and stands again, plants a kiss on Ron's cheek and adds, Godspeed, honey, as she walks off. She's being really weird tonight, Harry says. Oh, sure, Ron says. Yeah, mystery, no explanation for it, but look, Harry, I still don't understand how it all ended in breakfast. He came over to yell at you, and so you, what, made him some food? Says Harry. Well, sort of, not really, he adds, bristling defensively at Ron's raised eyebrows. He came to yell, and he did yell for a while. And then I explained that I hadn't known it was a reporter and had just been trying to, reduce the amount of post-war dickishness in the world, and he calmed down. Well, a bit. I'm not sure he ever really calms down, like normal people. Ron says nothing, though at the words normal people, he does take another large sip from his drink. And then, Harry says, well, I was really hungover, and I think he wanted to, I don't know, yell some more? Actually, I don't really know why he came back with the hangover potion. He said it was so I wouldn't have featured reporters. He left me to die in my own sick or something, but I'm pretty sure he was joking. Joking, Ron says thinly. Ha ha, yes, funny stuff. Anyway, then he got after me about the house, Harry says. Rimmel Place, I mean, which is why I was even asking about that stuff before. I guess I wasn't such a good homeowner. Oh, Ron says and winces. Yeah, that you are not. You might have told me. You don't know what you were like to be around that year, Harry, Ron says, and that's a mercy and a gift, and you should be grateful for it every day. Let's just say that the thing with the house was towards the bottom of our list of worries at that point. Harry opens his mouth to ask what had been at the top, and then thinks better of it. My point is, Harry says, steering them hastily away from that unhappy topic. He was chattering on and on about the house, and I wanted something to eat, so I just sort of started cooking. Only then I had enough food for two, and it would have been rude to not offer him some, and he accepted, so... Harry shrugs one shoulder. I gave him some breakfast. How civic-minded of you, says Ron in a strangled voice. It is at this point that Harry's chair, which he'd finally been beginning to trust, lets out a fart so enormous that it propels Harry out of his seat and almost into the fireplace, covering the room in glittering brown confetti. Everyone laughs, even Harry, and in ensuing confetti clean-up and reshuffling of seats, Ron ends up in a corner with Angelina, Arthur, and Molly, none of whom Harry wants to continue this particular conversation in front of. Which is fine. It's not like he wanted to keep talking about Malfoy anyway. Ron was acting really strange about it. Still, Harry feels a bit trapped. Suddenly, in the close warmth of the crowded burrow, he summons his coat and lets himself out into the back garden, pleased and relieved at the rush of cold air, the soft grey fog of his breath. Ginny's sitting on the back stoop, red hair spilling out from underneath the white knitted head. Harry almost goes back inside, but then he thinks about the odd little conversation with Neville the other day, and the way things seemed to sit a bit easier afterward. Maybe, Harry thinks, exposure's the thing. It's probably worth giving it a shot. He walks over and sits down next to her before he can think better of it. Harry, Ginny says. She sounds surprised, but pleased. Harry thinks he's almost sure. There's a beat of hesitation, just long enough for Harry to think that this was a mistake, and he's an idiot, and he's going to have to sit here with her in horrible silence for 5 minutes before she smiles at him and says, Say, did the chair go off? Harry laughs, more out of relief than anything else. It did. My own fault for sitting on it, but it was pretty spectacular, as farting chairs go anyway. My brother is a genius, Ginny says. She rolls her eyes, but her tone is too fond to give the gesture any weight. I heard him talk the other day. Apparently he wants to run a whole line of furniture like that. You know, farting chairs, farting ottomans, farting chaise lounges. If you can sit on it, it should fart. Seems to be his philosophy. It's hard to argue with, says Harry, and Ginny laughs, the sound bright in the muffling, pervasive quiet that always comes on the heels of fresh snow. There's a pause, and then, with the air of someone striking up bravely into the unknown, Ginny says, So Nav told me he ran into you at Draco's the other day. Oh, says Harry, wondering briefly and with passion why he can't seem to escape talking about Malfoy tonight. Yeah, it was, wait, Draco? Ginny raises her eyebrows. That's his name. I know, Harry says. He wraps his arms around himself, trying to keep the heat in. It's a little weird to hear you say it, to be honest. Yeah, Ginny says, shrugging her shoulder. For me too, but after a while it just felt strange to call them Malfoy all the time. Their whole relationship is a little weird in general, anyway. Actually, truthfully, I think he's just a little weird. Draco, I mean. Ginny pauses and then laughs. Well, and Nav too, I suppose. I think most of their conversations revolve around who gets to marry a scary old plant. Vicky, Harry says absently. Ginny gives him a look he can't quite interpret. Yeah, Vicky, right? Silence does descend after that, but Harry's pretty sure, not certain, but pretty sure, that it isn't awkward silence. It's the silence of sitting side by side on a snowy evening, watching the steadily deepening night. Ginny's got a mug of mulled cider huddled between her gloved palms, gentle tendrils of steam winding up from its surface and floating away on the wind. And in the distance, Bill and Victoire are building a snowman. Occasionally, George will pop out from behind a tree and throw a snowball at them, his cackles and Victoire's half-laughing little shrieks carrying back to the stoop. It's nice, comfortable. As they watch, Fleur comes out of the house and joins her husband and daughter. Bill wraps an arm around his shoulder, kisses the top of her head, as Victoire throws herself against her mother's legs in a snowy hug before tearing off after her uncle. Softly, Ginny says, I used to think this would be us. Harry wants to whip his head around to stare at her, wants to insist that they start slower than this, wants to demand wildly to be excused from this conversation and given time to prepare, but he doesn't. It's been years. If he's not ready now, he will never be. He keeps his eyes firmly fixed on an arbitrary spot in the distance, the spiky-looking fir that's a little too far out from the rest of the tree line, and says, Me too. Some of his hesitation, and okay, if he's going to be honest about it, his fear must bleed out into his voice, because Ginny says, Oh, Harry, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to I shouldn't have said... No, hey, it's fine, Harry says. He forces himself to look at her. She's beautiful, snowflakes caught in her hair, eyes heavy with worry. Really, it is. It was a long time ago, and I know we weren't, going to make it in the long run. I don't necessarily think that is true, Ginny says. She toes a little at the stairs with the tip of her boot, and then puts her mug down, scoops some snow up into her gloved hands, and starts rolling it into a ball. I think we could have gone the distance. Then why? Harry starts and stops. He knows why. She told him that horrible night all those years ago. Because he was closed off. Because he wouldn't confront his emotions. Because some days she thought he was dead inside. Because she was in love with someone else. Because I couldn't shake the thought that you'd wake up in 20 years with no idea why you'd done it, Ginny whispers. I know I went about it the wrong way, and I'm sorry. I was all kinds of messed up at that point, and anyway, I'm impulsive, like you, she adds, and he hears the compliment he thinks she means it to be. He doesn't know if he would have even a year ago. But Harry, I always felt like you were just, I don't know, going through the motions, I guess. And that wasn't what I wanted. Not for either of us. Harry knows she's right, and it stings in his eyes, at the back of his throat. He can't believe how much old history he's seen dug up this week, not after all this time he's spent avoiding it. It's like he turned over the earth, running into Malfoy, and now all these things he's kept safe and buried for a few years are running loose again. You deserve better, Harry says, quiet and sorry into the cold air of the night. Don't do that, Ginny says. When Harry turns to look at her, her eyes are hard. Don't act like that, like you're some kind of monster I got settled with. We both deserve better, Harry. We both deserve to be with someone who saw us for who we were, not as... She stops and swallows. a future or a hero or whatever else. Just someone who wanted us for us. Harry doesn't have anything to say to that. She's right. Not that he imagines he'll ever manage to find that for himself. It's enough, though, that she has it. It's enough that one of them does. He looks at her again, really looks, and sees the way the lines of her face have changed, the difference in the way she carries herself. Ginny at 17, at 18, she'd been a spitfire, a perpetual motion machine, always throwing herself into the center of whatever was going on. She liked to go to concerts and stay out dancing, and kiss Harry messily against the side of his jaw, just under his ear, one hand fisted in his hair. She was a beautiful girl, but nothing like as gorgeous as the woman in front of him, steadier and calmer and content with herself. In this way she'd never been able to manage when she was with him. God, Harry says, feeling anxious even to hear it come out of his mouth. We were so young. Ginny lets out a little huff of surprised laughter. Yeah, she says wistfully, and then punches Harry lightly in the arm. Hey, we're still young. Not that young, Harry says, grimacing. Go say that to my mother's face, I dare you, Ginny says. Better yet say it to Fleur's. She's coming up on the big 3-0, and reports from all corners says she's not handling it well. Yikes, Harry says mildly. Maybe I'll leave well enough alone. Well, Ginny says, tone sparkling with mischief, if it's that kind of mood you're in. And then she lobs the snowball she'd been making right in Harry's face. Because deep down, she's all mischief, regardless of circumstances. Harry lets out a war cry, and soon the whole family is outside, screaming and laughing and pelting snowballs, tackling each other into the drift. He catches Gin's eye a few times as the fight wears on, and when she looks back at him, grin fierce and happy, he checks for his bitterness and finds that, at least for this moment, it's gone. To be continued. Thank you for listening to this chapter of What We Pretend We Can't See by Gyzym, read by Ella Max Mabella. If you'd like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, AO3, or Tumblr.